we bought all the supplements, we brought it to the lab, we tested if the substance is inside. And then we actually discovered that 1/3 of the supplements even do not have the substance inside. It will never work.
Professor Andrea Maier is a world-renowned expert in geroscience and healthy aging. Professor Maier is the Oon Chiew Seng Professor in Medicine at the National University of Singapore and co-director of the Center for Healthy Longevity. Her research focuses on the mechanisms of aging and age-related diseases, and her work has significantly influenced the global understanding of aging, making her a leading voice in the field.
Roughly 1/3 has it inside, and 1/3 has it in much, much lower dosages inside.
Wow.
Sometimes you buy something, you take something, and it's actually not inside. There are not many studies in humans that if you are adding one supplement to another one, that it has an additive effect, that you actually get a bonus, get beneficial effects out of it, or even more effect out of it. So the combination trials have never been done.
Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Maier.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to talk a little bit about aging because that's your expertise. It says on your Chi Longevity website, you mentioned that aging is a disease that can be treated and that you don't have to wait for decline to start. Can you elaborate on how aging is a disease and what kind of treatments are being explored right now to treat it?
Sure. I think it's a little bit semantic, and it's also different depending on the perspective you have of aging as a disease. I will answer first this question based on being a physician. I'm a physician, which means I am diagnosing diseases and I'm treating the diseases normally. Think about diabetes. I first diagnose diabetes, what the glucose level is, the blood sugar level, and then I'm treating it. So when we look at aging, we now understand the aging processes since 10 to 20 years. We can now diagnose what the pace of aging is of somebody. And then I would love to actually intervene in the aging process of individuals, which means as a physician, I cannot treat something, I cannot intervene if it's not a disease. So that's the reason why many physicians are arguing that aging is the disease, but of course there's lots of consequences. I don't know anybody who is escaping at the moment, which also means that everybody is diseased. So we are, absolutely not clear, I think, at the moment in the terminology, is it a disease or not? But very importantly is that we now can measure how somebody is aging, and we have interventions in hand. So why shouldn't we act? So it's, as I said, a little bit semantic, is it a disease or not? But we just need enablers to act. And that's the reason why we are arguing a lot with the WHO to get an international classification of disease code for aging. So there was be enabled to use it in clinical practice and to bring it into clinical practice and to intervene.
There's kind of a negative connotation, right, about a disease, but that's something that we all go through. How do you wrap your head around that, sort of?
Sure, and that's also the reason why I said, okay, I'm answering this question as a physician. Of course, as a person, I don't want you to call me being a diseased person because I'm aging at this moment in time. And as said, 100% of the population is aging. And where do you actually then do the cutoff point that person is not aging or aging faster compared to the other one? So that's important. That's also the reason why we have so much negative feedback, I think, based on calling aging a disease. So that's also the reason why we, I think, have to change the terminology. Because nobody wants to feel sick. Because if you have a disease, most of the time that's also associated with the feeling sick. What the health and longevity medicine, I would say, arena wants is really to optimize health of individuals. So really, with a positive connotation, we are aging at this moment in time, but how can we optimize the process, and how can we intervene in the process that we are gaining quality of life years, and we are gaining function, and we are gaining creativity, we are gaining whatever we would like to gain, and make it a positive feeling attached to that negativity of, yes, you are aging, you are aged.
Right. It's a natural part of life, and some people really kind of welcome some parts of aging, but then there are other parts, of course, that are not as desirable.
If somebody turns 18, that's something to celebrate.
Right.
And then there's lots of connotation, and it's not about the number. Many women in my age are horrified of their age, because maybe menopause could actually enter. So, yes, chronological age is associated with so much negativity, like you accumulate all the age-related diseases and the loss of function. But on the other hand side, I think I have a little bit more wisdom than 20 years ago. But independently, so we really have to switch from thinking about a chronological age more towards a biological age. I'm much more passionate about telling you how biologically old I am than I'm chronologically.
That's something I'd like to talk about a little bit later. I want to examine the second part of your quote, which is that you don't have to wait for decline to start. Do you think there's an optimum time to start planning for this, to start preventing it?
Yeah, first of all is that we should actually look at the trajectory we are in. So that's most important. Very often we are going to the GP and we say the blood pressure is, the glucose level is. Very often we forget to actually look at where was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where is it now? So a colleague of mine here at the National University of Singapore, Professor Dean Ho, had a wonderful quote stating, "We are not a snapshot, we are a story, and look at your story." And I think that's so important in that sense, that don't look at where you are now, where you want to be in 10 years. Now look at the trajectory and look how that is functioning. Now that's most important. And that also answers your question, when is the right moment to intervene? Because for you, it might be very different compared to me, because maybe you maintained your peak capacity where you were when you were 20 or 25. And it depends on the decline of functions of an organ, of your muscle, of your happiness when you intervene. Biologically, if we are looking at cells we all have in our beautiful body, they're all deteriorating over time because we are using it. Everything we are using has scratches in the end, and most of the times we don't maintain the function of what we are working with, including our body. So there we could actually build the case that while we are using the body every second, we should repair. So there's not the best moment to start. From a clinical level, I think we have now evidence that we should absolutely start from the age of 30 onwards, because the function in our body declines massively. We can measure the cognitive function, our heart function, our liver function. Everything gradually declines from the age of 25 onwards. So then, of course, it would be great to maintain that function. But it's never too late. So we have clients at the age of 80 or 90, and there the beautiful body has so much capacity to increase in function. So all ages, I would say, we don't treat children yet, because development versus aging, we don't know how to disentangle that. Children are growing little kids. And what precisely aging contributes to that development, we do not know. So adults from the age 18 onwards, I think, at least see yourself as a story and not as that snapshot.
And before that decline starts, do you think there are preventative measures that otherwise healthy people should be taking?
Absolutely. I think personally, but there's not so much research yet, that the story starts even before conception. So thinking about the two individuals who are creating that baby, that newborn, I think thinking about the health of the parents to be is, I think, of utmost importance. It's not which kind of genes you are merging together, but, for example, which genes are being expressed and which environment you live. So there really the story starts.
You'd have to go pretty far back. It's a lot to consider when you're thinking of, having a baby and thinking about the long term.
When in the Second World War, mothers were pregnant but felt hungry and had no food. Actually, that the kids who were then born now had much more diabetes, age-related diseases compared to the peers. So they're a little bit younger and older individuals who were not exposed to the hunger winter, and especially in the second trimester. So we know that the physical well-being of the parents to be really influenced. age-related diseases 50 years later.
So do you think getting a good idea of your parents' health history, their environmental factors and stressors could be is that something that you ask patients to bring to you when they come in for treatment or consultation?
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us where you were born, what your parents did, how you grew up. Also societal factors like not only where, but was there poverty or not? Were you outside playing as a kid? So these are all determinants, for example, of allergies, how the immune system is being shaped. So we are so much more than just, okay, your cardiac function is this, but how do you enjoy life? With whom do you live? What do you really like? And these can all be motivators, for example, for certain interventions. So that's important, but also for risk of certain age-related diseases.
So as people become more and more informed about this and they talk to, they visit specialists like you, I feel like there's going to be kind of a disparity between people who have access to this information, people who don't. Do you think that there's going to be ethical or social implications of this ability to slow down aging versus the people who cannot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are two main determinants. The first is knowledge, and there's a knowledge gap based on socioeconomic status in between countries. I can tell you a little bit about our research regarding knowledge. And the second thing is the access to this new medicine, health and longevity medicine, which of course is absolutely not democratized at this moment in time. But already looking at knowledge, we recently did a study in Singapore, but now also doing that worldwide to see if people know what Healthspan is, lifespan is, if they would love to come to a health and longevity medicine clinic, if they know that they are aging and what that means. And there's a huge difference there's a huge knowledge gap in some of parts of the society. And I think that's most important, because if you don't know that intervention exists, how can you actually ask for it? So I always say you have to make decisions based on the knowledge you have, and then you can make shared decision making. So the first thing is really to improve the knowledge, and that's what we are doing in Singapore, but around the globe. So we have partners and are working in the Middle East, in the US, and in Europe to apply the same questionnaire to really see, okay, where are the gaps? To then decide, okay, how should an educational program look like? And once that education is there, in parallel, of course, we are working on longevity medicine clinics and really making sure that we are implementing not only diagnostics to measure the biological aging process, but also the interventions in a most effective way. That's important if we want to bring it into the healthcare systems, that we not only include clinically relevant parameters. So if I would measure something for you or in you and do an intervention, that it makes clinically sense, that you, yes, I'm feeling better and you're motivated. But on that side, there's also the flip coin. It has to be financially attractive for society, because it needs to be not only clinically relevant, but also cost effective. So this is something to be seen if it's cost effective, because at the moment, the health and longevity medicine clinics are self-paid in most of the country, or nearly all countries. And that, of course, has to change. So we have lots of private clinics. I also have a private clinic to longevity, but I really focus also to bring it into the public services, which we also did in Singapore by opening a longevity clinic in a publicly funded hospital. So in the end, we have to translate the knowledge into democratize the access.
Do you think, are there specific pockets of the world that are more tuned into this kind of medicine than others?
Yeah, sure. If you are seeing where the evolution is very fast of the health and longevity medicine field, you see it hugely in Asia and especially in Singapore at this moment in time. We already saw it in the US. Many private practices are being established. I think even before, I would say, the establishment of much evidence. So they were really ahead of time. What we see now is the Middle East, that they're very interested not only in the genome testing of entire populations, but also, okay, if you have genetic data of population, what do you do with it? So really now seeing from measuring the emphasis of really changing the health of entire nation. So yes, there are pockets, and it's growing and growing and growing. I would have never expected 5 years ago that our field would grow as fast as it is doing at this moment in time, because of governments understanding, okay, maybe, yes, we have health insurance, but the cost of the healthcare system in terms of GDP is rising and rising and rising. We need different methodology. We need different opportunities here to grow a much healthier society.
That's interesting. Like, you know, kind of like they're looking at the benefits, obviously, for themselves and for their country as a whole. Do you see any other reasons that it has been growing so rapidly? Any other influences like social media or anything like that?
Yeah, in the end, I would say it started with the consumers. The consumers ask for products most of the time. That can be a huge push. That's happening, I would say, in the health longevity medicine, the health longevity field. Consumers ask for a different approach. Consumers, especially middle-aged individuals, they see, I think, that they are aging. I am aging. What are the solutions? And therewith, the entire health longevity field is growing hugely with many startups at this moment in time. And that, I think, also enforced the thinking of governments to maybe differently. So, but it's consumer driven, and that, of course, has a very positive side, because we are absolutely on the agenda, and lots of influencers arguing for healthy longevity and for certain products. But it also has a downside, because there's so much need and push that I would say the academic community is lacking in terms of building the evidence at this moment in time. So we really have to speed up our academic rigorous research to then feed all the small, medium enterprises with that evidence to build a very important, and that's important for me, an evidence-based health and longevity medicine arena, where you, if you are approaching a health and longevity medicine physician, that the first know that that person is certified to do that job, so is trained, and that the diagnostics and the interventions are evidence-based, that you know, yes, very likely that it works.
Is that a question of funding, or is there something else to help push the science forward that's necessary?
Yeah, funding, of course, is in research is very competitive. It's absolutely increasing the number of funders who have the specific goals for health and longevity. There's also the establishment of Evolution, which is a fund by the Saudi family. A huge amount of money is being spent on research. So the research has never been funded so much, but compared to where the need is, it's still very, very little. But also now private funders, think about the Altos Labs, which is a privately funded lab, now really pushing the field towards product development, etc. So not only the understanding why we age, but especially also then translation into product development.
Do you also see an increase of people entering the field of geroscience more than before?
Maybe not so much from the research side. Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely an increase. But compared to where the need is, we absolutely need a push. So everybody who is watching at this moment in time, either you want a career switch or you have decided on your career, just knock on our doors, please.
Can we talk briefly about the hallmarks of aging and why they're significant in understanding the aging process?
Sure. Yeah. So since 20 years, we understand why a cell at a certain moment in time feels sick, ill, and is old. And very often we call it a senescent cell or zombie cells. So, and while understanding what's happening in our body at this moment in time, we understood mechanisms, and these mechanisms are translated into hallmarks of aging.
Okay.
there are 12 hallmarks of aging with a huge debate in our field. Couldn't it be 15 or 20, whatever? I think that's also a little bit semantic. We know and we understand why we age. We now classify what's happening in the cells, and that's the hallmarks of aging. I think many listeners might know that we have telomeres, which are very, very tiny things at the end of our chromosomes, our genes. They're getting shorter, shorter, shorter. It's called telomere shortening. And that might, for example, lead to a senescent old cell. And that's one hallmark of aging, but that's a very tiny one. So we have not many proteins in our body, and these proteins need to be folded and to function well. It's a little bit like there's something, amino acids, and you have to build them, and then they're building this nice protein. And that folding process is not going well with the aging process. Another hallmark of aging, we have mitochondria, which needs to produce energy, another hallmark of aging. So I won't go through all 12, but really understanding that if you're looking within a cell, there are so many different functions, and we now cluster these functions and abnormalities into hallmarks of aging. So it's nothing more or less. And as science really develops over the time, these 12 hallmarks of aging will be, I think, in the end, 200 hallmarks of aging.
How important do you think it is to address each hallmark? Or is there one that people should put more priority over any others?
So we now know that the pace of aging within one individual might be very different in different organs. So that the heart might age differently in terms of pace compared to the brain, the kidneys, the skin, whatever you name. Even between cells, the pace might be very, very different. That was a discovery 3 to 5 years ago, because I even thought if you would ask me the question 10 years ago, no, we are aging like same pace, that's fine. But you and me are different in terms of the pace, but within my body. We now know, okay, that's not the case. This is even more complicated because why is then the pace of one organ different compared to the other? It might be, and it's very likely, that the mechanisms why that organ is aging faster are different in the brain, the heart, and then the liver, and all the different cells I have. And here the hallmarks of aging kick in again, because in this beautiful cell, we have this now 12 hallmarks of aging. It might be that one cell has a proteostasis problem, so folding the proteins, compared to another cell, which might have very, very short telomeres, which means that in clinical practice, now going back to real practice, we have to understand what the pace of aging is of an individual, and then within that individual, what the pace of aging is within the body in different organ systems, and why that organ is aging. And then we can really interfere with that aging process dependent on what's going on in that individual.
It seems like I never really considered, my heart is diseased, for instance, but that seems a little bit different from like my heart is aging faster, if there's something specifically, that's very interesting.
But that's very interesting that you mentioned, because we already know that there are age-related diseases. So we have dementia, that's aging of the brain. We have heart aging, that's heart failure. We have COPD, which is aging of the lungs.
Right.
So imagine that we can prevent these age-related diseases, dementia, heart failure, COPD, while antagonizing the aging process like 30 years before that disease would occur, because now we know that the brain is aging faster compared to the heart or the lungs in that individual. And we have therapeutics therewith maintain that organ function very specifically for that individual to prevent that person will have dementia 30 or 40 years later.
Can you explain what happens on the cellular level as we age?
Sure. So we have a huge amount of cells in our body, and these cells all have different functions, but they have one thing in common. They are there. So they are breathing, they are being used. And if you are using cells, then you have damage. because you're using it. It's like using a car, you have scratches and you have to maintain it. And so we are using our cells. And while using it, we accumulate that damage, and some of the damage is being repaired and some not. And especially the damage which is not being repaired will lead to age-related diseases later in life. And now, which is so fantastic, we don't have to wait until there's an age-related disease, but we can measure the damage in cells. Think about the genome. We can now measure where genes are being damaged. And very luckily, often these genes are now they're not being used, so they are not being transcribed to have a protein and to be used, because otherwise we would have cancer immediately. But our body is very, very beautiful in only using very often the good material, not the bad material, but which also then means that the bad material is accumulating if nobody is cleaning it. And that's then being expressed as zombie cells, the accumulation of senescent cells, which are accumulating in our body.
Yes, you mentioned cellular senescence. You're saying that's the accumulation of dying or dead cells?
Yeah, it's the accumulation and damage of a cell. So a cell is functioning quite well, can be repaired, maintained, but there's always that accumulation of damage which is just staying there. At a certain time, the cell has to decide, okay, how do I feel? Can I still replicate? And there was while replicating, do I actually give that damage to the next generation of cells? Because it's not repaired. So the cell decide to say, no, I don't want to replicate anymore and give the damage and the bad material into a next cell generation. I will not replicate, and I will call myself senescent. Okay. So these cells accumulating because many more cells say, okay, maybe replication, reproduction is not good anymore. That's as I am, but I will stay in the tissue. And we now know that the accumulation of senescent cells, the cells who cannot replicate anymore and don't do it anymore, that they might induce age-related diseases. Because tissues of individuals with dementia or heart failure, we see this accumulation of these senescent cells.
And with these cells, what do you think? What have you seen are the most promising therapeutic approaches to mitigate or reverse?
In my studies, already 10 years ago, it has been shown if the mouse is accumulating these senescent cells and the drug is given to release these senescent cells to that they are dying, so you are clearing up the tissue, that animal is living longer compared to the one who is just accumulating the senescent cells. So these kind of drugs are now called senolytics. So senos is old, and lytics, you are removing it. So you're removing the senescent cells. So now the first drug trials are in humans. So it really made the translation from animals to humans to then test if this senolytics, if we would apply that to humans, if we could avoid age-related diseases, and also therewith, as a sort of side effect, to live longer.
I'd like to talk about chronic inflammation with the aging process. How much impact does it have?
I would say lots, but I cannot quantify it. So what we have and see during the aging process is that also our immune system is aging. And our immune system, while not being very reactive anymore to antigens, for example, the things at need if we are being exposed to bacteria or viruses, think about COVID. The immune system, while being aging, is just inducing lots of chronic inflammation. So chronic means without need, there is inflammation. And this chronic inflammation is associated with lots of age-related diseases. Think about especially cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, obesity, etc. So the sort of failure of the immune system inducing chronic inflammation might be the driver for many age-related diseases. And these kind of markers we already use in clinical practice. Think about a marker is CRP, C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. If that's higher, that individual has much, much more risk for age-related diseases 10 or 20 years later in life. Of course, that chronic inflammation is accumulating, damaging the cells, not being repaired or maintained, and then the age-related disease kicks in. So reducing that inflammation is of utmost importance.
And what strategies can people use to reduce that?
Very often, lifestyle interventions really help to reduce systemic inflammation. We know from exercise studies that moving much, much more than the sedentary behavior, it's very important. We have Mediterranean diet, where lots of olive oil is being given, lots of vegetables, really rich, nice, colorful food that just by eating habits and changing that, we can reduce the inflammatory level. Because therewith, we're also changing the gut microbiome. We have 1 to 2 kilograms of microbes in us. Everybody who is, or most of us listening, they now also has been found that they have a very important role in mitigating systemic inflammation. So by keeping our gut microbiome happy, very likely that also other cellular systems, including the immune system, is much, much more happier. So lifestyle is very important. Stressed individuals have a higher inflammatory markers compared to the ones who say, I give a 9 out of 10 for my life, and my quality of life is good. So reducing the stress levels, and there was good sleep, etc. Avoiding infections like cytomegalovirus. So there are some viruses which are constantly, once exposed to them, are staying in the body. So avoiding them already helps. So many strategies on an individual level to get inflammation out of the body.
You talked a little bit before about biological age compared to chronological age. How do you measure biological age?
Biological age is a marker for the pace of aging and is very different from the chronological age in many individuals. And nowadays we can measure the biological age using clocks. So everybody knows what a clock is. Now we have clocks measuring the biological age. Very often we are using, and it's termed epigenetic markers. So we have epigenetic clocks. What is an epigenome? So we have a genome, the genes we are born with. And on top of the genes, there are layers. And one of the layers is the methylome. That's the reason why it's methylation clocks. And what this methylome is doing is switching on and off the genes. I mean, you have genes, it's an open sort of book, but the body decides, the cell decides what kind of genes to read and not to read. That's very important because I would love to read the good chapters, and not so much the boring chapters of my book or the bad chapters where I'm being scared, for example. So we can now, based on the epigenome, modify which kind of book chapters in the gene we are reading. And that is one of the clocks we are currently using in clinical practice. And this is just one of the many examples we have.
How significant or accurate have you seen this in predicting health outcomes?
So there's a Biomarkers of Aging consortium. So there are many researchers now working together to really look at the accuracy of these clocks. The epigenetic clocks are quite accurate in predicting not only chronological age, that you would say easy because you know how old you are, but especially also predicting mortality and the incidence of diseases. So who is prone for age-related diseases? So they are accurate. We already have clinical biomarkers. Think about a VO2 max, so being on a treadmill, really testing the endurance of the body. So these clinical markers or cognitive tests, they're very, very valid in predicting future outcomes. So they're already in place, and every GP even could use these biomarkers of aging, these clocks, to determine the biological age of individuals.
Are there any biomarkers that you think are more reliable or better for assessing the effectiveness of anti-aging interventions?
Sure. I think the clinical biomarkers of aging already are in prime time. So this is measuring the blood pressure, the pulse width velocity, measuring cognition, with lots of imaging techniques. Think about a CT of the brain. So these are all already validated in other specialties. Think about neurology, endocrinology. So it's already used in clinical practice, and we just have to repurpose them, use them. The biological biomarkers of aging, I already use the term methylation clock, epigenetic clocks. They are less validated compared to the clinical biomarkers, and big consortia are now working on validating them even more. Very importantly, in that the third biomarker of aging group, these are the digital biomarkers of aging. Very often we now have smartphones, we have smart rings, we have smart watches. They all give us information not only about how many steps we do or not do, but also about other habits, for example, sleep. When do we go to sleep? What is the sleep quality? So how much REM and deep sleep do we have? And these are also now being used as biomarkers of aging. They're hugely important in clinical practice to really guide intervention.
How often do you use them in your practice? Like, for instance, like a smartwatch. Like, how often do you actually ask your patients about what they've found on their devices?
Well, we are connecting all our patients to digital devices. So, of course, if they want, but I couldn't do clinical practice without anymore. I introduced them already 15 years ago at pulse clinics, where I asked my patients, okay, what's your movement habits? And I used the first accelerometers at that moment in time. So all our patients are being tracked if they want. Our healthcare coaches look at the data day by day to also see, okay, what is somebody doing? What are the patterns? How can we nudge individuals into certain directions? And most of the times, nudging somebody into a certain direction helps if the event, for example, of not moving, is a little bit aligned. So the next day, hey, what did you do? Can we analyze what occurred?
Have you found an uptick in positive behaviors since introducing these to people, because they're kind of a constant reminder?
Yes, absolutely. And I would go back to my first introduction in clinical practice, and that's 15 years ago in pulse clinics. When I had normally the conversation, I would ask, how many steps do you do? How does it look like your day? And they would say, oh, I do so much. And I have a dog, and I move so much, really not a problem. And then you bring that device to the clinic and you give it to patients. And after 2 weeks, you see the patient back and say, you only have to say, hey, I don't want to be your dog. Because you are seeing actually the habit. So it's absolutely crucial, and it absolutely helps in understanding how our life looks like. Because if I would ask you, what did you do yesterday? And you had to recall, like, it will be very inaccurate. If I would ask you, what is your weight? What is your height? Don't ask that, just measure. And it's the same for physical activity, sleep, etc.
Do you think that we're on the verge of making aging more of a controllable process with these devices, with biomarkers, things like that?
No, it's absolutely close by. The technology is already there, and every GP should actually ask their patients, can I have a look? How did you analyze your last week? And did you do enough? Or how can I help? So I think everybody who's listening here should actually ask that during the next GP visit, do you want to have a look at my data? Can I share it with you? Can you help me in managing my lifestyle? And it's already there, but the uptake of conventional medicine is just a little bit slow.
So your work spans a wide range of aging and longevity. Can you share or discuss some of the most surprising findings that you've encountered so far?
Surprising. Most of the times research is very predictable, because that's the reason why you do the experiment. If I may reformulate that question and talk about excitement, I would never have thought that the excitement is so big to bring it now into clinical practice, that we now have as clinicians the tools to not only diagnose the pace of aging, and that I can say, hey, scanning you, and of course not putting somebody in a scanner, but biologically scanning an individual that we now can use that already to tailor interventions. And that's an absolute aha, and now understand what to do in clinical practice. And that occurred really 3 years ago, and it really develops. Our field is developing so much because now we have the tools to make smarter decisions. You don't have to go back and say, everybody who is 50 should eat a certain diet or should take 10,000 steps a day. Now we are in the space to introduce a new term, and that's precision geromedicine. Precision means like we are very precise, we know what we do, and we adapt based on what we see the intervention, based on that individual or that group of individuals. And geromedicine is really understanding the field why we age. And moving from healthy longevity medicine, which is a little bit more vague, to precision medicine is what excites me, and I think also what I haven't foreseen 5 years ago.
Thinking about the progress of geromedicine, how do you think people should tackle approaching anti-aging and longevity medicine with such a diverse population across the world when you consider socioeconomic differences, cultural differences, genetic differences? I know that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but how do you compensate for such a diverse world population?
Yeah. So first, there is biological differences in, for example, individuals who are of different ethnicities. So that's very important, and that's really important to then also consider what the approach is, not only on individual level, but especially on global level. So we have to take into account genetic backgrounds, and we have to take into account where somebody lives. Of course, we now know that nature nurture, where somebody lives and what kind of environment is interacting with each other. So that's of importance. On top of that, not only what genes where, are socioeconomic differences, are structural differences in existing healthcare services, for example. So that entire framework and complexity from different biologies, different environments, different habits, religions, behaviors, we are bringing together in a concept of intrinsic capacity, which is now being recognized by the World Health Organization as one of the key concepts of see how we are going to implement health longevity medicine or precision geromedicine worldwide. So we understand now there is the genetic, the environmental, all the components to then see how should we build KPIs around the globe to see, okay, how is a nation aging or not? At the moment, we are living in the United Nations Decade for Healthy Aging, which means that all the member countries are coming together and building the framework to measure how populations are aging. And that's hugely exciting because we have a framework. We can say in one country compared to the other, on certain continents, the pace of aging is different. And then understanding why that is of utmost research importance. But also it, I would say, really now brings aging, geroscience into another arena that's being discussed. So we are not only talking about anymore, this is the proportion of old people. That was the discussion like 10, 20 years ago, when I would say, okay, these are aging individuals, how do we optimize their health?
Given your research on age-related diseases, what would you recommend being the best prevention or early detection techniques or methods for people?
Measuring your weight, very, I think, easy to implement in around the globe. I think as well as malnutrition, being underweight, as especially overweight in countries with a higher socioeconomic status is of utmost importance. So if I only can say one measurement, it's weight.
Would you say that that's geared towards diabetes or other illnesses as well?
So a higher weight is associated with nearly every age-related disease, especially higher risk of cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, osteoarthritis, dementia, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, very manageable. It's not too inaccessible to people. And I'd like to talk with you about supplements. Do you think that supplements have any benefit for people who are otherwise healthy? Or do you think that they should mainly be used to fill in gaps in nutrition? I mean, in terms of like improving cognition, improving memory and focus and things like that.
So the question is, who needs it?
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important point. We are doing lots of research on that. Who is at need for what? It's again, a personalized, the precision approach, which is most important. So first of all, supplements are, I would say, I consider them as hugely important in the discovery if they could alterate our aging process. So there could be potential in really alternating our aging process. The evidence around supplements, especially in healthy individuals, is not very huge. Last year, a landmark study has been published, and that's the Cosmos studies, giving multivitamin and multimineral pills to supplements to individuals at risk for cognitive decline. And that was the first study really showcasing that multivitamin and mineral pills could actually have a positive effect on health and preventing cognitive decline in there with dementia. That was the first study, a big study, good quality, actually showcasing that. Showcasing also how much we do not know. My group is heavily investing in the research on supplements because a supplement, the small molecules can be very potent. So we are doing lots of research in individuals being middle-aged to see if we can match the diagnostics with the intervention. So the intervention is a supplement and really giving the supplement at need. So we are testing alpha-ketoglutarate at the moment. We did already studies with nicotinamide mononucleotide, spermidine, quercetin. There is such a big list of supplements which have a potential effect. I would say for some, we have early evidence in humans, but not for all.
And you've talked about how knowing your own body and your physiology is very important before deciding to take any supplements. Can you speak to why knowing that health data is vital for knowing what is right for you?
So our body is aging at a certain pace, which the pace is different in the different organ systems, and the mechanisms why a certain organ is aging might also be different. If you're taking a supplement is being given for a certain purpose. So it is very important that people take supplements based on the needs of that body. And understanding the body is the first step to then match that intervention with what is needed. So therewith, I really think that supplements should be only given or advised to individuals really at need. How do you know if you need it, that it's measuring?
Do you think there is enough accessibility of these tests? And if not, how do people go about determining what's best for them?
So this field is evolving. 5 years ago, we didn't really have all the measurements. So these are really upcoming. So that's important. So that's also the reason why the accessibility is not huge at this moment in time. And even if tests are available, most importantly is to have a good interpretation of what does it mean. Let's start a little bit more positive, and that's what is feasible. We can already in blood samples measuring, for example, vitamin D or B vitamins. So we have it enhanced, but very often individuals just say, oh, I would take a multivitamin mineral pill, I just supplement, that's fine. I would take a different approach. Don't expose the body to something which you might not need, and ask for measuring minerals or vitamins in the body, and then take supplement based on the need and measure again to actually see if it helps, because that feedback loop is very important. So there are measurements every GP can already do, which are readily available. On the other hand side, we are now learning what we can do with the genome testing or the epigenome testing or microbiome testing. And the very specialized clinic like G Longevity, we now know what to do to really individualize the treatment based on the diagnostics. But that's absolutely not yet implemented in, for example, family medicine or GP care. That needs further evaluation, and also the understanding what to measure, in whom to measure, when to measure, and who's going to pay.
You've also talked about how supplement labels don't always match up to what's inside the supplement. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions people have about supplements?
That supplements are always good. And the color on the outside, if it's more colorful, it's better. And I also thought like this. 3 years ago, if you would have said, okay, you are buying supplements and maybe nothing is inside, I would say, oh, you're stupid. This is nonsense. I only entered really the field of testing supplements because I wanted to do a randomized control trial. I wanted to test supplements in participants to actually see if they have a positive effect and what kind of and how much the positive effect would be. And I asked my staff, like, what should we use? Like, tell me. They said, I don't know. I said, I don't know either. So we bought all the supplements, we brought it to the lab, we tested if the substance is inside, and we call it our label claim study. And then we actually discovered that 1/3 of the supplements even do not have the substance inside. It's not inside there. So it will never work. And that roughly 1/3 has it inside and 1/3 has it in much, much lower dosages inside. So that for me was an eye-opener. However, it was already proven that for vitamin D and protein supplements, other researchers found the same results, that sometimes you buy something, you take something, and it's actually not inside. So supplement quality is of utmost importance.
Mm-hmm. What do you think can be done to change, more regulation or?
No, we need absolutely much, much more regulation because from the outside you do not see what is good and what's not good. It's not so that the very expensive brands are better compared to the more cheaper brands. Absolutely not the case. We analyze that. It's not that if one brand selling one type of supplement, it's good, that the other one is also good. So it's absolutely, it's a little bit it's non-predictable. So very importantly, and that's what we are doing, is talking to regulators and say, okay, it's a non-regulated, it's a regulated field, but there are so many holes and gaps that still supplements without the ingredients are on the market. So I think testing is very important, and then certification is very important. So that's something we are working on in the ecosystem to really guide the consumer, because you would like to know, I would like to know what to buy and not first have to test.
You've talked about how in your clinics you like to introduce one supplement at a time. And I have two questions about that. The first one is, can you share any examples where this method has any surprising or unexpected results based on this approach?
Yeah, so why do we not give 30 supplements at once? And very often this is already done in multi-pills where many ingredients are being mixed together. If we are looking at the research, we know that supplements as the mixture have never been not much tested in animal studies. It's now occurring. There are not many studies in humans that if you are adding one supplement to another one, that it has an additive effect, that you actually get a bonus, get beneficial effects out of it, or even more effect out of it. So the combination trials have never been done. And these supplements, we are giving them in clinical practice because we think they're very powerful. So that's also the reason why we are giving one for one and actually seeing, okay, did we give the right supplement? Is the body changing positively? Is that person feeling better? To then continue with that supplement and then adding based on the needs another one to see, is that then additive effect? Because if we are giving it at once, you don't know which one is working. Then you are adding up as many biohackers with many pills and you're, okay, I take 50 a day, or as others reporting 120 a day, where you do not know if you even harm the body. So I think in the end, really working on quality of the approach rather than the immediate possible effect not knowing what actually works.
Have you ever had the experience where a patient might get impatient because they want to try more than one thing at once? And how do you manage those expectations that they have?
Yeah, that's very often. So you make that decision to come to a health longevity medicine clinic, and then you want all now. And so very often this occurs already, not with the intervention, but with the testing, because the testing is so, we are sending them to so accurate labs that we are sending them abroad. So the waiting time of a couple of weeks already is sometimes difficult to get the results back. But yes, people, once they want to change, also want to do that. I think the best approach we do in clinical practice, saying, hey, you are 50 or 55 or 40 years old. You will have the time of 4 or 6 months to actually see what fits your body, to then have much, much greater effect. And that's known in clinical practice. If I would have a patient with hypertension, I first would say, please eat less salt and move more, and all the lifestyle advices before I add a drug. And then if the drug doesn't have that effect, I would add another drug and another drug to have then the effect. So the titration of interventions is very important. And that's what we learned in internal medicine, where I'm coming from. I'm an internal medicine specialist. And we just apply that with a very good rationale to this new field of precision general medicine.
And the last question I wanted to ask you today is about, I want your advice for consumers. How can they be critical and informed about the supplements that they're taking and avoid any pitfalls? What would you say to people?
Don't take any supplement if you don't know if you need them. That's the first thing. So I know how nice this feeling is. If you want to do something good for you, either you buy a new cream or you are buying these supplements and you're looking at them and what should I take? And so first learn who you are, what the body needs. So every GP can already help to then make the decision what to take, and especially seek advice of either GP or a health longevity medicine physician, what makes sense at this moment in time to take it. Because if somebody takes many supplements, and lots of our clients do that, and in the end we say, but your microbiome or your genome, maybe not the good choice. These individuals took them for years, sometimes 10 years, without knowing what the effect is. So always know who you are, do the interventions which are matched on who you are, and then retesting to actually see if there is a beneficial effect.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I've learned a lot talking to you, and thank you very much for all your insight.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation today with Dr. Maier. I know I learned something about aging, longevity, and supplementation, and I hope you did too. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.